Welcome to the Voice of Reason channel. Be sure to like this video, plus follow and subscribe to the channel to see more great content. Also check out all of our show pages on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch TV, Getter, Truth Social, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Who's Your Reason. Make sure to tell your friends, spread the word of reason, and enjoy. Plus, become a supporter of the show by signing up on our Patreon account to get special access to additional content not heard on the show. It's time for you to become the ultimate Hoosier-holic. For more information, find us online at HoosierReason.com. Let's get into what's trending today. What do you say?
What's trending today?
I wonder if they had global warming back then. That would be interesting. I wonder, well, they had global cooling, which is why it was known as the Dark Ages, because nothing would grow, and it was really a struggle for anything to grow because of the global cooling. Now we have global warming, which they say is really bad, but then they erased it because it wasn't global warming, and now it's just climate change because they don't know what's exactly going on. It's a fascinating topic, and that's what we're going to talk about next here with our next guest. He is the author of the book Global Warming, The Great Deception. Guy Mitchell on the line with us here. Guy, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Andy. Thank you. I hope you are.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Yeah, it's good to have you on the program. It's fascinating how we've gone through this. We went from global cooling to, I remember the study in like the 80s and 90s where it was like acid rain. That was the big thing. Then it turned to global warming. Now it's just climate change because we don't know really what's going on, but whatever it is, we've done it and it's all our fault, right?
Yeah, that appears to be the case. It's interesting. I have a website, the address of which is globalwarmingdeception.com, and I wrote an op-ed on that about when did global warming turn to climate change, and one has to conclude it's several years ago when people figured out that none of the world's temperature databases for the atmosphere, oceans, or landmass depict any warming. So the dilemma is, well, if the data doesn't support the hypothesis, what should we do? And the answer apparently is, well, you change it to, it's not global warming now, it's climate change.
Climate change.
Which is pretty hard to measure because you don't know exactly what the datum is. Where do you start?
It's funny they do that because I remember there was a hearing that Ted Cruz was grilling some of the government scientists about that, and they wouldn't answer the question. They would just repeat the phrase of, we concur with the 99% of scientists that concur about man-made climate change or man-made global warming, whatever they said. And they would never answer anything. They would never actually solve any problems or explain anything. It was just, we concur with the government scientists that were done in a study where only a couple thousand scientists that were on a government database actually did the survey that said they believe in man-made global warming or man-made climate change. But science itself, the experiments, the hypothesis, and then do the experiment and then see whether we're actually right or not, that system of operation is really no more, is it? Especially when it comes to the climate change issue.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about it, and I go to some length to present this in my book, is if one starts at what is the generally accepted principles of science, what's called first principles of science in the relevant fields. In this case, it's thermodynamics, which has to do with heat transfer, spectroscopy, which has to do with the absorption and emission of electromagnetic radiation by matter, and all matter does that has a temperature above 0 degrees Kelvin. And then atmospheric physics and quantum mechanics, which deals with how molecules absorb photons and emit them. What you find out if you look at the science, if you look at the research, which I did too, I spent a year and a half or more reading papers on the subject that were published by scientists who use these first principles of science in the relevant fields. What you find out is that the increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere from 280 parts per million to about 410 parts per million has resulted in a downwelling, that's a radiation directed down toward the Earth, heat value of about 1.7 watts per meter squared. So if you have a 60-watt bulb in a lamp in your den, this is about 1/60th of that. spread out over 1 meter, which is about 9 square feet, and that compares to that 1.7 meters watts per meter squared compares to the typical solar irradiance on a clear summer day near equatorial latitudes of about 1,000 watts per meter squared. So it's de minimis, and that's based on science. I mean, these are actually calculations that research scientists have done using publicly available data that prove that the heat flux that comes back to the Earth from CO2 molecules that absorb 15 micron wavelength infrared radiation is de minimis. It has not. I mean, water vapor is by far and away the most active greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
And of course,
you can't regulate that.
It's hard to link that to man's activity. So it's the biggest scientific fraud in history. That's the conclusion one should draw.
Yeah. Now the question is why? Why the deception? Why the fraud? Why create this crazy scenario for the fear-based politics? Obviously, I know it's kind of a rhetorical question because the government's obviously getting a lot of power and a lot of money for this mindset. They get to regulate a lot of industry. But is there other reasons? Why in the world would they go down this road?
Well, I think there are. I think there are three. And you have to look at the proponents of this fraudulent hypothesis. And I say fraudulent because if you look at the temperature database to the atmosphere, the first 8 kilometers of the atmosphere is known as the troposphere. It's available at UAH.temperature or .org, really. But they have a plot of the temperature of the lower troposphere for 40 years, and this data is developed by satellites that polar circumnavigate the globe. So it's the most accurate record we have. And for the period 1979 through 1998, the troposphere cooled every year. And that's while the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere increased 25%. So you say, well, I mean, and the UN IPCC, the UN Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, scientists have access to this data. So they've been promoting this fraud now for ever since the IPCC was created, which was around 1988. So you say, why? Well, there's been over $1 trillion spent on climate research, quote unquote, over the last 50 years or so with absolutely nothing to show for it. The models that have been created are computer models which you can't backtest them. They can't predict the past, which is the way you validate a predictive model, and they certainly can't forecast the future. Yeah. So when you read the UN published data, this is what they say. They want to transfer wealth from the developed countries to the developing countries under the guise of addressing climate change to impact a socio-economic agenda. And all you need to do is look at what comes out of these climate conferences where they say that the developed nations ought to pay the developing nations reparations for damage done to their countries and economies. The second big proponent of the proponent of this fraudulent hypothesis are global investment firms. They trade carbon credits, carbon offsets, and now these ESG investments. And they stand to have made, Al Gore has, but they stand to make billions of dollars of profit from trading these various vehicles that are all based on a fraudulent hypothesis. And then you have the governments. You have people like Alexandria Cortez, with AOC, who says, well, we want to take your gas stoves away, your gas-fired hot water heaters, and probably what will come next will be fireplaces because they burn wood that emits CO2. And then, of course, outside grills, if you got a charcoal grill, if you got a gas grill.
Yeah.
So where it's all about the control for politicians. So those are the motivations and I point that out in my book.
Sure. You're right. It's all about the control. I mean, if we get rid of our fire, our wood-burning stoves, and our gas, and then we just get based on the electric, and then we get the redistribution of, well, you use too much electric, so therefore you can't use that anymore. We're going to cut you off. I mean, hey, but she knows what she's talking about, man. I'm telling you. I mean, she's the one that...
I am told this is a garbage disposal.
So that's going for us as well. Guy, we got to take a break here. Can you stick over one more segment with us?
Yeah, buddy.
Awesome. Hang tight here. We'll continue this when we come back here on The Voice of Reason.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier. Fighting for freedom every day. The Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
Oh, darn right it is. Reason, common sense, rationale, trying to bring some sanity back into the world. One radio listener at a time. Multiple radio stations all over the place, plus the TV and the streaming, and of course, I don't know, wherever. Podcasting. Make sure to download the podcast. So I never plugged that enough, and we do well with our podcast download. So thank you for that. We appreciate that very, very much. The great deception of the climate change battle. It's funny how we are so gullible. We fell for it. Of how the world's ending. We need to do this. Remember the whole Al Gore, the seas will rise by 15, 20 feet, whatever it was. The coastlines will be underwater within 10 years. And, well, that came and passed as of like a couple of years ago, and didn't happen. So now it's the next one, AOC and Greta Thunberg and everybody else, all these other yahoos that are no climate experts in any way, shape, or form. They have now turned this into that political battle, and we need to start pushing back from this one. We're talking with Guy Mitchell, author of the book Global Warming, The Great Deception, which you can find online at globalwarmingdeception.com, and check out everything that he's got going on here with all the great facts. Guys, we talk about the science behind this, which I know that AOC is the expert on the science here, but let's just for a moment, let's pretend that she doesn't know what she's talking about, which is a stretch, I know, but for a second, let's just go here. Is it true that if a supervolcano actually erupts like it has in the past on this Earth, that one eruption of a supervolcano is actually putting more CO2 into the Earth's environment and atmosphere than we've ever created in CO2 production in the history of mankind? Is that true? Because I've heard that story before.
You know, you hear a lot of, I would say, allegations or suggestions about what man-made, what anthropogenic emissions are in a year or have been since, the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1870. I've read a lot of estimates about how much CO2 gets emitted into the air when a volcano erupts, and the truth of the matter is that no one knows. But the and one of the, as I point out in my book, one of the difficulties about this is there's no way, since about 99.9% of all the carbon in the atmosphere is carbon-12, that includes both man-made emissions as well as natural emissions. There's no way you can measure and say man has, if the concentration in the atmosphere is increased from 280 parts per million to 410, how much of that is anthropogenic? How much of that's man-made? No one. Not only does no one know, but if you could cut a sample of the atmosphere and look at it, it would all be, carbon-12, which is 12 protons and neutrons in the nucleus, yeah. And so there's no way to know.
There's no way to know. Yeah.
But the definitive measure is, you look at the temperature databases of the troposphere, which is first 8 kilometers of the atmosphere, the oceans, and the landmass, which is, that data has been corrupted by NOAA. But if you look at it, what data they report shows a de minimis, like a 0.02 degrees centigrade change per decade. Well, that's 0.002 per year. That's well within the margin of error of these measuring devices. So it's all a fraud. It's a put up. It's they've been manipulating the data. You probably heard about ClimateGate, where the head crew, the Hadley Climate Unit in East Anglia, England, was caught. The scientists were caught. Emails were intercepted that proved that they were tampering with the data to try to create the appearance of global warming.
And it goes right back to that concept, like you said, of the control, of the manipulation, making us live in fear to where, hey, you can't turn on your heater or your AC during the winter or summertime because you're harming the environment. We're going to go fly on our private jet, though, to tell somebody else they can't do the same thing, because it's all about that control. Guy, we're out of time, my friend. I love the conversation.
Hey, Andy, I've got one other suggestion, though.
You got 15 seconds. Go for it.
Seven Kings Must Die.
Seven Kings.
That plays.
Yes. Yeah. I watched it over the weekend, and I bawled my eyes out because it's all over. I can't believe it. Seven Kings Must Die. They need to make another one. Guy, I love it, brother. I appreciate it. Let's get you back on the show again soon.
See you later.
Always a pleasure. There it is. All right, podcast up in a bit. We'll see you on the radio tomorrow for a Tuesday.